Hi, I'm Luke Escombe. I was diagnosed with IBD at the age of 14. I'm 42 now, so this disease has been a big part of my life, and it's given me some really big, frankly shitty life lessons. I've learned the true meaning of words like despair, anguish, agony, misery, and humiliation. But in facing those things, in dragging myself through those most egregiously shitty, rectally prolapsy, anally fistulae times, I've also learnt about the good stuff. Hope, love, courage, faith, resilience, friendship, and the power of music, laughter, creativity, and this wonderful thing we call the human spirit. So, while I'm going to be talking about IBD in this series, what I'm really interested in, what I want to celebrate, is the chronic condition we all share, and that's our humanity. Okay, episode 1 of Chronic. This is something I've been wanting to make for a long time, and I'd like to say a huge thank you to Gali Health for giving me the opportunity and the support to make this series a reality. Thanks Anna and Kayla at Gali for believing in me and giving me basically complete creative freedom. I mean, this is fucking incredible. Nothing I say has to be approved by a committee. It can be real and raw and rock and roll. Before we go any further, I want to address the fact that I am recording this series in 2020, in the year of COVID and all of its associated batshit craziness. And look, I don't know about you, but because of my IBD and the times it's left me housebound, sometimes for more than a year at a time, I feel curiously well prepared for this pandemic. Last year was actually a very busy one for me. I'm part of a touring kids band called The Vegetable Plot that was doing shows all over Australia. I play the leader, Asparagus, and I was feeling pretty burnt out by the end of the year. And of course it didn't help that large parts of Australia were literally burnt out. And so I found myself quietly wishing for a more peaceful, home-centred existence in 2020, but of course without my illness coming back and forcing it on me. And so I guess what I'm saying is I feel like all of this is slightly my fault, and I got what I wished for. I don't have to go on tour. The Australian tax office has literally been giving me money each month to stay at home and write new songs. And it's actually been an okay time, at least personally. I'm mentally and emotionally equipped for lockdown because of my illness. I've been through it before. I know how to deal with isolation and uncertainty without losing my mind and blaming it all on 5G or George Soros. I've done all of that, believe me. I've been that person too, and I'll tell you all about my explorations in the realm of alternative health and conspiracy theories in another episode. But in this first episode, I wanted to talk to you a bit about my childhood, and in particular, my parents. My dad was a very cool guy in the late 1960s. He had long hair, wore groovy clothes, and played bass guitar in a rock and roll band called the Shakespeares. He looked a lot like the avant-garde rock musician Frank Zappa. Unfortunately, by the early 70s, Dad's rock career had kind of fizzled out, and he'd had to take a new job selling feather dusters door to door in South London, which, let's face it, is a bit of a letdown. One minute you're supporting Pink Floyd in Paris, the next you're getting the door slammed in your face by bored suburban housewives. It's a bit of a bummer. But as you know, life is full of twists and turns. You never really know what's around the corner. As one door slams shut, another swings open. Every Saturday night, the lady who ran the duster sales team threw a party at her house. According to my dad, this was her way of getting the young men who worked for her drunk so she could get inside their pants. Well, look, I don't know about that. But my dad was at this party one Saturday night in one of the upstairs rooms with a couple of other young hippie types, when one of them said, "Hey man, do you want to drop some acid?" And my dad, being the ex-psychedelic rocker that he was, said, "Yes, I do." And so there they were in this lounge room, tripping balls, as we might say today, imagining that the lurid green 1970s carpet was actually a bubbling swamp, and the sofa cushions were giant lily pads, and they were talking and laughing into the wee small hours. And what's important about all this is if we pull the camera out just a little bit on this scene, we'll see a 21-year-old blonde-haired German lady in the room next door, listening intently through the wall. And what she keeps hearing, like a low, warm rumble, is the sound of my dad's deep voice coming from the room next door at the party. And the sound of it, The frequency, the vibration, it captivates her. She wants to meet this man, whoever he is, with this enchanting, deep voice. And so finally, as the dawn is breaking and the party guests are starting to head back out into the cold, grey South London morning, she locates the owner of this magical voice. He's sitting on a bed in an upstairs room, still gently hallucinating, and when he sees her, something quite magical happens to him too. You see, for the whole night, because of the effects of the LSD, my dad has been visualizing the auras of everyone he speaks to. If they're people he connects with, they appear to have bright, sunny auras. If not, their auras are cold and blue. And so when he sees this young German lady, and she says hello to him, with one of the few English words she knows at this time, her aura is like a brilliant golden sunrise. The light of it is dazzling, almost blinding. In her faltering, broken English, she invites him back to her place to wash his hair. And this is quite a big deal because my dad has very long hair at this moment in history, 1971. And after she washes it, because his hair is curly like mine, but he wants it to be straight, she lays it across her ironing board and irons it straight for him. And this is the story of how my dad met my mum. By the time I came along in the late 70s, Dad had sold all his musical equipment, but he hadn't given up on rock and roll. He was working for a company that shipped antiques into Europe when an opportunity came along out of the blue to help a band with transport for a European tour. What my dad realized was there were no freight companies who specialized in rock and roll tours, so he started his own. And thanks to his hard work and innovation, I was able to see some of the greatest rock and roll shows of all time, live and free, when I was just a boy, including the original Live Aid concert in London in 1985 with Freddie Mercury, as well as stars like Prince, Bruce Springsteen, David Bowie, Pink Floyd, Tina Turner, U2, Paul McCartney, you name it. So naturally, when I grew up, I wanted to be a rock star. Since you've been gone. When I talk about my childhood at conferences or comedy shows, which is something that I used to do quite a bit before that guy in China ate that bat and unleashed COVID upon the world, I like to put up a photograph at this point of me as a child. I'll try to describe it for you. First of all, it has that faded sepia tone of all old family photos from before the age of digital cameras. You know, back when you had to go to the pharmacy and hand over your roll of film to a strange man in a white lab coat to get it developed. And what this picture shows is me as a 7-year-old boy sitting cross-legged in front of a glowing Christmas tree in the living room of our first family home. And I'm holding in my hands a sacred object, wrapped in plastic, my very first guitar. A small nylon-stringed beginner's guitar that looks nothing at all like the heroic axes I've seen in the hands of my rock and roll idols, but it's still a huge step up from the badminton racket that I've been sliding on my knees across the living room table, strumming up to this point and screaming, "I love you, Wembley! Are you ready to rock?" And I'm dressed in a distinctively mid-1980s fashion with sweatbands around my wrists and forehead and a big bird's nest of curly brown hair sprouting from the top of my head, which makes me look like a cross between John McEnroe and Mark Knopfler from Dire Straits. And millennials, I apologize in advance for many of my references in this series. Please Google them. And on my face, as I hold this plastic-wrapped guitar upside down in my lap in front of the Christmas tree, is a contented, dreamy-eyed, ever so slightly mischievous smile that says, "Watch out, world, here I come." As a young boy, I was very taken by the confidence of the great rock and roll frontmen, guys like Mick Jagger, who would strut out on stage at Wembley Stadium and say, "Are you feeling all right?" And then 80,000 people would go, "Woo!" And then he'd say, "I can't hear you." And they'd go even crazier. And then he'd say, "I still can't hear you." And the whole stadium would go bananas. And I remember trying to channel this in my very first show at the local pub. I walked out, struck a big chord and said, "Are you feeling all right?" And then, "I can't hear you." And then, "I still can't hear you." And my bass player said, "Luke, there's no one here." Because, of course, one of the biggest things a rock star needs is confidence. And by the age of 14, I had zero. I'd just been diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And for the last 3 years of high school, my only friend in the world was my guitar. Thanks for listening this far, friends. That was episode 1 of Chronic, written and recorded by me, Luke Escombe, with production and audio enhancements by Michael McGlynn at Vienna People Studios in Sydney. Thanks again to Gali Health for giving me the support and encouragement to make this series, as well as a very cool free t-shirt with a Star Wars vibe. I'll tell you about that another time. Thank you, Gali. In the next episode, I'm going to be talking about the food culture of the time and place I grew up, a place I call pre-Jamie Oliver Britain. Then in episode 3, I'm going to be talking about diagnosis and all of the things I went through before, during, and after it. I hope you'll tune in again. See you next time on Chronic.